What if the garden was never lost, only hidden, waiting beneath layers of time and memory? They say Eden vanished after the fall, sealed beyond the reach of humankind. But what if its gates never closed, only shifted, buried beneath myth, under the weight of rewritten histories and forgotten names? Somewhere between the roots of mountains and the veins of rivers, the echo of paradise might still breathe, faint and trembling, like a dream refusing to die. Tonight, let us walk together into that silence, to trace what remained and to ask what truly happened after the fall. In the beginning, there was not silence, but memory, a faint pulse that lingers beneath all stories, whispering of a garden that once existed, and perhaps still does. Every civilization that came after Eden carried its shadow, echoes of a place untouched by death, a realm where knowledge and innocence once walked side by side. The Hebrews called it Gan Eden. The Sumerians spoke of Dilmen, the land where the sun rises. The Greeks dreamed of the islands of the blessed, and even the Celts murmured of Avalon beyond the mists. Across time and tongues, the same yearning repeated itself, a memory of perfection that could not die. But something in that memory was fractured, somewhere between myth and history. The story of Eden ceased to be a place and became a warning. The fall was not merely an expulsion from a garden, but perhaps a descent from an era. What if the forbidden knowledge that brought the curse of mortality was not moral defiance, but a kind of awakening, a shift in consciousness that tore early humanity away from the frequency of the divine? Many ancient traditions speak not of sin, but of separation, a rift between worlds that once intertwined. Archaeologists have found strange traces of such a transition. Around 10,000 BCE, something extraordinary happened. Humanity shifted almost overnight from wandering bands to builders of monumental sites. Gibisip in Turkey, Nabtoplia in Egypt, and the sun-aligned mounds of Peru. It was as if a collective memory reawakened, guiding human hands to shape stone into the language of the heavens. Could these places have been the first attempts to recreate Eden's geometry, a sacred order that once governed creation? In Mesopotamia, tablets from Meru, one of the world's oldest cities, describe a time when the kingship descended from heaven. The city was founded by Enki, the god of wisdom, who once walked among men beside the waters of the Abzu, the deep subterranean sea of creation. To the priests of Sumer, Eridu was no ordinary settlement. It was the first place, the original home of the gods. Some scholars have long noted the parallels. A garden by flowing waters, divine beings, a fall from grace. Could Eridu have been the memory of Eden translated into clay, passed through the filters of myth and empire? Yet something darker hums beneath the surface of these parallels. After the fall, the story changes tone. Paradise becomes forbidden, guarded by a flaming sword, watched by the cherubim. In nearly every culture, access to divine knowledge became restricted, hidden behind temples encoded in rituals written only in the languages of the initiated. The serpent, once a symbol of wisdom and regeneration, was turned into a villain. The feminine, once seen as the living vessel of creation, became bound to shame. What had humanity done that required such a reversal of meaning? Some suggest the true fall was not moral, but metaphysical, the loss of a kind of perception. Before language became literal, before symbols hardened into dogma, the ancients may have seen the world as a continuum between spirit and matter. The tree of knowledge might then represent the division between unity and duality, between seeing the world as being and seeing it as object. To taste its fruit was to awaken to difference, to know self and other, light and dark, male and female. In that awakening came power and exile. This exile, however, may not have been the end. What if the story of Eden was never meant to describe a single event, but a recurring cycle, a rise into awareness, a fall into separation, and the endless yearning to return? Across mythologies, this pattern repeats. The golden age that collapses, the gods who withdraw, the flood that cleanses, and the rebuilding of a lesser world. It is almost as if humanity is haunted by the memory of having once known perfection and the unbearable grief of having lost it. Evidence of such grief lingers in the earliest languages. The Sumerian word for life, Ti, shares its root with rib, recalling Eve's creation from Adam's side. In Egyptian, the hieroglyph for life, Ankh, forms a cross crowned by a loop, an image scholars say may represent the horizon where heaven and earth once met. Even the Hebrew letters of Eden, Adalet, Nun, form a pattern associated with the light, door, and seed. These are not random symbols. They suggest that the memory of paradise was woven into the structure of human thought itself. Yet somewhere the thread was cut. Ancient texts hint that after the fall, the earth itself changed. In Sumerian myth, the gods withdrew beyond the Abzu. In Genesis, the ground was cursed. In Egyptian law, the Nile ceased to flow from the primeval waters, but from earthly springs. Perhaps this marks not a moral punishment, but a geophysical shift. The end of the last ice age, the flooding of fertile lands now buried beneath the Persian Gulf or the Black Sea. If Eden was a place of balance and abundance, perhaps its loss was the literal drowning of a world that once seemed eternal. And so humanity wandered, haunted by an emptiness we could not name. Every temple became an imitation garden, every altar a gate to the lost world. Kings built ziggurats to climb back toward the heavens, and prophets dreamt of restoration. Even in the modern age, scientists search for the cradle of civilization, where rivers once met, where the first cities rose, where the story began. Each excavation, each fragment of pottery seems to whisper, "We were here and we remembered." But memory is dangerous. The question remains, who wanted Eden to be forgotten? Was it time or something else? For knowledge once forbidden may still exist, scattered among ruins, buried beneath names we no longer understand. Perhaps the true garden was not destroyed, but hidden in plain sight, beneath the soil of myth, within the architecture of our own consciousness. And if that is true, what happens when we begin to remember again? Somewhere along the Tigris and Euphrates, long before kings and empires, the land once shimmered with an otherworldly fertility. Ancient records speak of rivers that no longer flow, of gardens that no longer bloom, and of waters sweet as honey that turned bitter after a great division. Could this have been the physical echo of a deeper event, the slow fading of a sacred resonance that once bound heaven and earth? If the fall marked humanity's separation from divine unity, then perhaps Eden's disappearance was not destruction, but disconnection. The search for Eden has always been less about geography than about memory. Scholars have traced it to Mesopotamia, Armenia, even beneath the Persian Gulf, where sonar imaging has revealed traces of ancient rivers, converging in a pattern eerily similar to the biblical four rivers: Pishon, Gilead, Tigris, and Euphrates. Some geologists believe that during the last glacial retreat around 12,000 years ago, a vast plain stretched where the sea now lies, a cradle of abundance that may have inspired the earlier stories of paradise. If the flood that followed swallowed that land, could that have been humanity's first memory of a loss? There is a haunting symmetry in this theory. For nearly every flood myth, from the Sumerian Zeus Sudra to the Hebrew Noah, from India's Manu to the Aztec Talocan, speaks of a cataclysm that erased a golden age. Afterward, survivors rebuild with fragments of forgotten wisdom always, aware that something irreplaceable was lost. It is as if the story of Eden's fall and the story of the flood are mirrors. One spiritual, one material, reflecting a single truth: that every gain in knowledge carries a wound of remembrance. The myths suggest a continuity of consciousness that stretches across continents. The Sumerian Dilmun, said to be pure, bright, and eternal, was a land where the lion did not kill, the wolf did not snatch the lamb, the sick man did not say, "I'm sick." The same perfection echoes in Egyptian writings about Zept, the first time when gods ruled among men and harmony filled the world. In the Vedic hymns of India, the sacred mountain Mary rose at the world's center, where gods gathered in an eternal dawn. These are not disconnected tales. They are fragments of a shared memory refracted through language and time. Perhaps the question then is not where Eden was, but when humanity lost its ability to perceive it. For paradise in the ancient sense may not have been a location but a state of being, an attunement to the living cosmos. In the old Sumerian myths, when Enki walked the earth, the Emi of creation, divine laws governing balance and order, were accessible to all. But when those Emi were stolen, scattered among cities, and hoarded by priests and kings, the world began to fragment. Knowledge became power, and power became distance. The sacred turned into secrecy. It is here in this transition that the roots of our amnesia seem to grow. As civilizations rose, myths shifted from memory to metaphor. The gods became unreachable. The divine was relocated from the world to the heavens. And humanity, once participant in creation, became mere observer. Was this the real punishment of the fall? Not death, but separation from the living language of the earth. When modern archaeologists unearthed the ruins of Eridu, they found layers of construction. Temples built atop older temples, each one more complex than the last. The lowest layers revealed simple shrines beside springs, places of water and offering. Higher levels introduced walls, altars, and sealed chambers. The sacred became enclosed. What began as communion transformed into containment. It is tempting to see in those walls the same movement described in Genesis. From open garden to guarded temple, from freedom to hierarchy, from spirit to ritual. Even in the biblical narrative, there are hints of an earlier intimacy. Before the fall, Adam is not a king, but a gardener, one who names, tends, and listens. The act of naming itself is sacred, suggesting harmony between word and world. After the fall that power fractures, language becomes a barrier as much as a bridge. By the time of Babel, humanity's speech splinters entirely. Could this be another echo of the same rupture? The loss of Edenic language, the end of direct communication with creation itself? In the Book of Jubilees, an apocryphal text once studied alongside Genesis, Eden is said to remain eastward in the mountains of righteousness, guarded until the end of days. It describes angels who record the deeds of men and a veil of light that separates heaven from earth. The description is strikingly similar to the Sumerian myth of the Abzu, where divine waters are shielded by sacred seals. If these are different cultures describing the same event, a withdrawal of divine frequency, then perhaps the veil still exists, not as a wall of fire, but as a change in perception. Some scientists have noted that human consciousness itself seems to have evolved in punctuated leaps. Around the same time humanity began to form symbolic thought, there was a rapid expansion of creativity, art, music, architecture, astronomy. Then came myth. Could Eden's loss coincide with this shift? The birth of self-awareness that made humanity capable of both wonder and fear? The very awakening that defined us may have also exiled us from unity, and yet through all the ages the dream persisted. Ancient mystics sought the way back, not by journeying east, but inward. The Hermetic texts speak of remembering one's divine origin. The Gnostics wrote of sparks of light trapped in matter, yearning to return to the source. The early Christian mystic origin even suggested that the soul fell from an original paradise into the physical world and that salvation is remembrance. Perhaps paradise was never destroyed, only forgotten, like a melody drowned beneath the noise of history. Archaeology may never locate Eden, but in the deep strata of human culture, in the recurring imagery of trees, rivers, and light, something of it endures. The tree of life appears not just in Genesis, but in Assyrian reliefs, in Norse Yggdrasil, in the Kabbalistic it came. Always it connects the worlds above and below, heaven and earth, spirit and flesh. Always it suggests that the gate is not lost but dormant, waiting for eyes that remember how to see. If the fall was a forgetting, then the journey through history has been an act of slow remembrance. Every myth, every sacred site, every whispered story of paradise regained may be a fragment of the map home. But there remains an unsettling question. What if not everyone wished for humanity to remember? If knowledge was once forbidden to preserve balance, who decides when the veil should lift again? Somewhere beneath the shifting sands of ancient Mesopotamia, the waters still flow in silence, and perhaps in that silence, the memory of Eden still breathes, patient, waiting for the world to listen once more. If the garden was more than a place, perhaps it was a frequency, one the earth itself once resonated with. Long before written memory, before nations, humans may have lived in alignment with that hidden rhythm guided not by domination, but by harmony. Ancient myth and geology seem to whisper of a time when nature's forces were balanced, the poles stable, the climate gentle, and the cycles of the heavens predictable. Then something shifted. The stars themselves seemed to realign. The world tilted quite literally and perhaps spiritually. Was this the true meaning of the fall? The moment when the axis of Eden bent and humankind fell out of tune with creation. Geological records confirm that around 2800 BCE, the Earth experienced a violent climatic shift known as the Younger Dryas. A sudden cooling followed centuries of warming, leading to floods, extinctions, and the collapse of early human settlements. Some scientists propose that a massive comet impact triggered this event, scattering molten glass and nanodiamonds across continents. Others suggest solar storms or magnetic disruption. Whatever its cause, the result was cataclysmic. A golden equilibrium vanished, replaced by survival. Many of the earliest myths of fire falling from heaven, of waters rising to consume the land, may not be allegory at all, but memory encoded in story. If paradise was tied to a stable earth, then the physical upheaval of that age could explain its disappearance. But the more haunting possibility is that the cataclysm changed not only the planet, but consciousness itself. Cultures separated by oceans speak of a time when gods once walked among men, when communication with the divine was direct and effortless. Afterward, the gods withdrew to the sky, fell asleep beneath mountains, or hid beneath the sea. Could it be that something about human perception fractured, that we lost the ability to sense what we once could? Across ancient traditions, remnants of Eden's geometry remain. Temples and megaliths align perfectly with solstices, lunar nodes, and star risings. The same mathematics appearing from Sumer to Egypt, from the Andes to Angkor. To modern minds, these are architectural feats. To ancient builders, they were acts of restoration. The ziggurat, the pyramid, the stone circle, all were attempts to recreate the lost harmony between heaven and earth. When priests chanted in measured tones, when offerings of grain or incense spiraled into the air, they "They're not appeasing gods. They were tuning the world." This harmony was more than metaphor. The ancients believed sound, number, and form were the language of creation itself. Pythagoras, who studied in Egypt and Babylon, taught that the music of the spheres governed all motion in the cosmos. Sumerian hymns describe creation as milim, radiant sound. Even Genesis begins not with light, but with voice, and God said. It is possible that Eden, as remembered by myth, was the world before that language broke, when the song of creation was whole, and we could still hear it. Some researchers of archaeoacoustics have found that many ancient temples amplify specific frequencies, often around 110 hertz, known to induce a meditative trike state. In the hypogeme of Malta, a subterranean temple over 5,000 years old, that frequency resonates perfectly through carved chambers shaped like human throats. When voices chant within, the air hums. It is easy to imagine that such architecture was not for worship, but for remembrance, for restoring the Edenic resonance within the human being. If the fall was a loss of vibration, then these places were instruments built to recall the original tone. But if some sought to remember, others may have sought to forget or to control. The post-Diluvian civilizations that rose from ruin did not share knowledge freely. Kings became intermediaries between gods and men. Temples became treasuries of hidden wisdom, and language was weaponized through secrecy. The Sumerian emi, once attributes of divine order, became possessions of rulers. In Egypt, the hieroglyph for scribe was also the word for magician. To write was to bind energy. Could this shift from open communion to guarded mystery reflect an intentional suppression of humanity's earlier connection? Religious historians have long debated why the gods of antiquity seem to diminish through time. In the oldest myths, they walk, eat, and speak with humans. In later ages, they appear only in dreams or symbols. Eventually, they withdraw entirely, replaced by abstract deities or unseen creators. Some see this as theological evolution, but it might also describe a gradual fading of perception, as if humanity's spiritual senses dulled with each generation. Perhaps Eden did not vanish at all. It simply fell below the threshold of human awareness. This idea finds strange resonance in the writings of early mystics. The Gnostic teacher Valentinus described the material world as a shadow of the fullness in the human heart, as a gate that once knew the sound of its origin. The Kabbalists wrote of the Shekja, the feminine presence of God, exiled from the world and longing to return. In these teachings, the fall is not sin, but separation, the sundering of creation's inner harmony. And redemption is not forgiveness, but remembrance. Even modern physics in its cold precision brushes against this mystery. Quantum theory suggests that reality itself behaves differently when observed, that consciousness participates in creation. String theorists describe the universe as vibrating filaments of energy harmonizing across 11 dimensions. It is a language that echoes ancient metaphors. The music of the spheres, the word made flesh, the vibration that holds the cosmos together. If matter is song, then perhaps Eden was simply the world before we fell out of tune. There are remnants of this harmony in our oldest rituals. The soft hum of monks chanting in a mountain monastery, the rhythm of indigenous drummers echoing across plains, the spiral dances of mystics turning beneath the stars. Each seems to reach for something we once knew instinctively. These are not performances, they are acts of remembering. When rhythm, breath, and intention merge, the veil thins. For a fleeting moment, the lost garden stirs. But if Eden is a frequency, a state of resonance, then perhaps not all vibrations are benign. The same myths that speak of creation's harmony also warn of discord, of false tones that lead astray. In Sumer, the noise of mankind disturbed the gods. In Genesis, Babel's tower fell when human speech grew confused. Harmony, when imbalance becomes chaos. Could it be that humanity's attempt to reclaim divine power too soon, to rebuild the resonance without wisdom, led to our further exile? Some traditions whisper that a remnant of the old resonance still exists, buried in specific locations where ley lines cross, where ancient temples stand, where certain frequencies still hum through stone. Pilgrims describes strange sensations in such places. Lightness, clarity, visions. Scientists might call it magnetism or sound resonance. Yet the experience feels older than explanation. It feels like recognition. Perhaps this is what Eden after the fall has become. Not a place to return to, but a pattern to reawaken. A hidden music that still vibrates through the bones of the earth, waiting for consciousness to listen again. But if the garden song still lingers beneath the noise of time, who or what silenced it in the first place? There is a strange pattern woven through the oldest myths of the world, a motif of guardians at the threshold. Every story of paradise ends not only with exile, but with watchmen placed at its gates. In Genesis, it is the cherubim and the flaming sword. In Sumerian law, the Akalu, semi-Dineen sages born of the deep, are banished after the flood, forbidden to walk among men. In Egypt, the gods who once ruled retreat into the underworld, leaving their thrones to mortal pharaohs. Each tale suggests not annihilation, but restriction. Eden, it seems, was not destroyed, it was sealed. If this is true, the real mystery is not the garden's location, but its protection. What power would guard a forgotten paradise, and why? Some believe the answer lies in the transformation of knowledge itself. For to guard Eden is to guard remembrance, and to control remembrance is to control reality. When humanity fell, knowledge became property. In Sumer, only priests could read the sacred tablets. In Egypt, the mystery schools admitted only initiates. In Greece, the oracles spoke in riddles understood by few. The divine became encoded first in language, then in symbol, then in silence. Across the ancient world, a single image repeats. The serpent coiled around a tree or entwined upon a staff. To the Hebrews, it became the emblem of temptation. But in earlier traditions, it symbolized the spiral of knowledge, the energy of creation, the bridge between heaven and earth. In Sumerian art, Enki's staff bears twin serpents rising toward wings. In Egypt, the uraeus coiled cobra crowned the brow of pharaohs. In India, the serpent Kundalini sleeps coiled at the base of the spine, awaiting awakening. What if the serpent in Eden was not evil, but the messenger of remembrance, one that humanity misunderstood? When the serpent offered the fruit, the story says, "Your eyes shall be opened and you shall be as gods." The tragedy may be that humanity awakened too soon without harmony. Knowledge without alignment becomes distortion. In that moment, the sacred pattern inverted. The serpent, once symbol of renewal, was cast as deceiver. The feminine, once vessel of life, was bound in blame. And the guardians closed the gates not out of vengeance, but mercy to protect the balance from a consciousness no longer in tune. This idea that divine knowledge was intentionally hidden echoes through every esoteric tradition. The Egyptians called it Zepaneta, the secret of the first time passed down in symbols too subtle for the unprepared. The Gnostics called it Gnosis, forbidden wisdom that frees the soul from illusion. Even the early Christian mystics spoke of a hidden manner, nourishment of the spirit reserved for those who remembered their origin. To them, paradise was not lost, only veiled. And the journey of the soul was to pierce that veil through remembrance. Archaeological discoveries seem to confirm that something was indeed encoded in Mesopotamia, the earliest. Ununiform tablets are not mundane ledgers as once thought, but star maps, precise alignments tracking celestial cycles beyond the capacity of primitive cultures. In Egypt, the temple walls of Dendor and Edfu describe a world before the world, built by divine architects before the first kings. Even Plato's Thais describes an age before Atlantis, when the gods shaped the world from geometric harmony. It is as if the ancients tried to preserve encode fragments of Eden's blueprint before it faded from memory entirely. But the farther history moves from the source, the more distorted those fragments become. By the time of Babylon, the stars that once guided ritual became tools of divination. In Greece, divine geometry devolved into mathematics. In Rome, sacred kingship hardened into empire. Each translation brought loss. The guardians in myth became demons, the serpent Satan, the goddess of shadow. The world of symbol turned literal, and humanity began to forget that paradise had ever been within. Still, the guardians appear again and again at the borders of myth. The cherubim with burning swords, the sphinx with riddle eyes, the flaming gates of the underworld guarded by lions, bulls, and winged men. Even in Buddhism, the four celestial kings guard the gates of Mount Meo, preventing entry to the unready. Could it be that these figures are not enemies, but protectors of a threshold, ensuring that only those who have remembered the Song of Eden may pass through unshattered? If Eden is a hidden frequency, perhaps the guardians or its resonance's defense mechanism symbols of cosmic immunity against disharmony. In every mystery tradition, the initiate must undergo purification before approaching the sacred. Fasting, silence, darkness, Only when the inner vibration is aligned can the gate open without consuming the seeker. Even in modern science, there is an echo of this idea. High-frequency resonance systems, when disrupted, create destructive interference. Too much force at the wrong tone shatters the structure itself. Maybe the ancients encoded this principle in myth. The flaming sword eternally moving could be the oscillation itself, the living vibration that guards the way between worlds. In the ruins of Nineveh, archaeologists once uncovered a carved relief depicting winged figures surrounding a stylized tree. Each figure holds a pine cone toward the tree's fruit, while on the other hand rests a small bucket, interpreted by scholars as a ritual object. But esoteric historians suggest another reading. The pine cone as symbol of the pineal gland, the eye within said to perceive the unseen, the bucket, the vessel of life. Perhaps the image portrays not worship but activation, the guardians tending to the tree of life, preserving its vitality until humanity learns to see again. Even the architecture of ancient sanctuaries mirrors this pattern. A series of concentric enclosures, each gate narrower than the last, leading to an inner sanctum where only the high priest may enter. It is as though every temple was a memory of Eden reversed, the outer world chaotic, the inner one pure. The initiate's path through silence and darkness toward the illuminated core may symbolize the journey back through the layers of separation toward the center where heaven and earth once met. In this light, the guardians are not there to keep humanity out, but to ensure that we are ready to enter. The sword does not punish, it purifies. The cherubim do not threaten. They protect what must remain inviolate until consciousness matures enough to behold it without distortion. The question is not whether the gates can be opened, but whether we have become capable of standing within their light. And perhaps that is why every attempt to forcibly reclaim paradise, whether through empire, science, or technology, has failed. Each time humanity tries to rebuild Eden without understanding its laws, the result is imbalance, war, and ruin. The Tower of Babel rises only to see our humble. The philosopher's stone glimmers, then fades. The pattern repeats because the frequency remains unchanged. The guardians are patient. They have eternity. If paradise still exists beyond the veil, then it waits not for discovery, but for resonance. The sword of fire will not burn those who move in harmony. It will light their path. But for now, the gate remains closed. The echoes of Eden humming faintly beneath the noise of civilization. Somewhere in the spaces between dreams and dawn, the guardians still keep watch. And perhaps they are not keeping us out at all. Perhaps they're waiting for us to remember who we were when the garden still sang. When we speak of the fall, we often imagine a moment of punishment, a divine decree separating humankind from paradise. But perhaps it was something far stranger, not exile, but amnesia, a soft eraser that moved not through destruction, but through forgetting. Eden, if it existed at all, may not have vanished in fire or flood. It may have faded the way dreams fade, into myth, into symbol, into scripture. And in that slow forgetting, the world itself began to change. Every ancient civilization seemed to inherit fragments of that loss, as if each culture remembered a different aspect of the same fracture. In the Sumerian epics, the gods depart and kings take their place, ruling after the kingdom descended from heaven. In Egypt, the reign of divine beings gives way to mortal dynasties. In India, the Vedic texts mourn the end of Satya Yuga, the age of truth, when men were as gods and harmony filled the earth. The Greeks called it the end of the golden age. Hazard wrote that the iron race now toils beneath the weight of time. Everywhere the pattern repeats, the withdrawal of the divine, the dimming of memory, the rise of toil and mortality. It is tempting to see this as nostalgia, the romantic longing of civilizations looking backward. Yet the consistency of the imagery, the garden, the fall, the flood, the age of sorrow, suggests something deeper, a universal trauma. Could it be that the collective memory of humankind carries the echo of a single transformative event, one so profound it reshaped both the planet and the psyche in the ruins of ancient Mesopotamia? Certain inscriptions speak of days before the Black Storm and the time when the rivers left their beds. To archaeologists, these are metaphors for natural disasters. But to the ancients, nature and spirit were not separate. A storm was not only weather, it was the breath of the gods. A flood was not only water, it was the washing away of the worlds. When the sky darkened and the stars shifted, perhaps they saw not only cosmic disorder, but a moral and metaphysical one. The heavens themselves had turned their faces away. The psychological echo of that moment may linger still. Humanity's earliest art, carved in stone or painted in caves, often depicts hybrid beings, half human, half animal, half divine. They seem to emerge from the threshold between worlds, caught between what we were and what we became. In later ages, these figures became demons or angels, guardians or monsters, but perhaps they are memories, portraits of transition, when the human being was still porous to the unseen, not yet fully confined to the material. If this is true, then the fall was not a punishment, but an adaptation. Consciousness contracting in order to survive. To endure the density of matter, the human mind may have had to forget its infinite origin. The veil was mercy, not malice, and yet, beneath the surface, the longing to remember never died. It is there in every religion, every myth of return, every whispered promise of redemption. The early mystery schools sought to reignite this memory. In Egypt, the rites of Osiris reenacted death and rebirth, the initiate descending into darkness to awaken to divine light. In Greece, the Eleusinian mysteries taught the secret of the grain that life must die to live again. In Sumer, priests of Inanna spoke of descent into the underworld as a journey of transformation. All pointed to the same truth that Eden was not lost but hidden within the cycle of death and renewal. To remember it, one had to descend. The symbolism of descent repeats endlessly. The hero entering the cave, Jonah swallowed by the whale, Christ descending into the tomb, each as a journey into forgetting only to emerge into remembrance. In psychological terms, it mirrors the process of individuation, the descent into shadow to reclaim what was lost. Eden in this light is not only a myth of the past, but a map of the soul. Every human life recapitulates the fall and the return. Every birth is an exile from unity. Every act of awakening, a rediscovery of paradise within. But this remembering has always been contested. History is filled with examples of knowledge suppressed, teachings burned, texts rewritten. The Nag Hammadi scriptures discovered in Egypt in 1945 reveal a vision of Genesis radically different from the canonical version. In those writings, the serpent is not the deceiver but the liberator, urging humanity to awaken from ignorance. The God who forbids knowledge is not benevolent but jealous. The fruit is consciousness itself, and the exile a metaphor for incarnation. For this, the Gnostics were hunted, their libraries destroyed. The forbidden knowledge was forbidden again. Why such fear of remembering? Perhaps because to recall the original unity is to dissolve the structures that thrive on separation, power, hierarchy, control. If the garden were rediscovered within, temples and thrones would lose their hold. The fall then becomes not only a spiritual event, but a political one, a narrative that keeps the gate closed. The more we believe paradise lies only beyond death or beyond reach, the more easily the world remains divided. Even the language of time conspires in this forgetting. We speak of history as progress, of civilization ascent. But what if it is the opposite? What if the further we move from the source, the more fragmented we become? Archaeologists uncover the ruins of Gobi Cape, a temple built at the dawn of civilization, then deliberately buried. Who buried it and why? Perhaps they understood that some knowledge must sleep until the world is ready again, or perhaps they buried the memory itself to protect it from corruption. And yet every age finds a way to remember. The Hermeticists of Alexandria wrote, "As above, so below." The alchemists sought not gold, but the restoration of the prima materia, the original unity of being. In medieval cathedrals, the geometry of rose windows mirrored the cosmic flower of creation. Even now in the modern world, when science dissects matter and mind, the old language reemerges in quantum fields, in resonance, in holographic patterns. The same truth spoken in new tongues. What if Eden has been whispering to us all along through the symbols we thought we invented? The serpent in DNA's double helix, the tree in the branching, neurons of the brain, the river of stars that flows through the Milky Way. All echoes of a memory encoded in the architecture of existence itself. The fall may have been the beginning of history, but history itself may be the slow unfolding of remembrance. Somewhere between the first sunrise and the last written word, humanity stands between forgetting and awakening. The garden has not vanished. It has gone inward. And perhaps when we cease to look for paradise in the past or the sky above, we might begin to hear it again in the rhythm of breath, in the pulse of the earth, in the silence before dawn. For the true question is not where Eden went, but whether we still carry its seed within us. If the seed of Eden still lies within us, then what became of it through the long millennia of empire and conquest? Did it wither, or did it adapt, hiding in the language of symbols, in art, in ritual, waiting for those who could still hear its pulse? For when the ancient world turned toward dominion, something subtle was lost. The sacred became doctrine, the mystery institution. The gate inward was replaced by the temple outward. And in the shadow of those great civilizations, the memory of paradise began to wear another name, heresy. After the cataclysms that marked the end of prehistory, humanity rose again, but not the same. New rulers declared themselves the interpreters of heaven. Knowledge that once flowed freely was divided into hierarchies, priest, king, commoner. The garden's residence, once open to all, was guarded by walls of ritual and secrecy. In Egypt, the priests of Heliopolis claimed to hold the words that could awaken the gods. In Babylon, stargazers measured time in the movements of Venus, building calendars to bind eternity into cycles of control. In Israel, the Ark became the new Eden, a container of divine presence locked within veils. Everywhere, the divine was enclosed, owned, and mediated. Yet even in this new order, the undercurrent of remembrance persisted. In the shadows of temples and the songs of mystics, the same theme hummed. There was once a wholeness that must be restored. The Psalms whisper of the garden well-watered by rivers. Isaiah of the desert blooming again. Egyptian hymns speak of the time when the Nile flowed from the heavens, and Sumerian laments cry for the meadows of Dilmun where no tears fall. The poets remembered what the priests forgot, that paradise is not conquered, it is recalled. Still power feared memory, for remembrance dissolves control as empires expanded. Forbidden knowledge was buried deeper. Alexandria burned. The Aenas hid their scrolls in desert caves. The last of the Hermetic libraries vanished beneath sand, and yet the ideas survived, passing in whispers from scholar to seeker, wrapped in allegory and symbol. The rose that blooms from ashes, the stone that lives, the fire that purifies but does not burn, each an echo of the same truth. Eden endures in those who remember how to see. It is no coincidence that during these ages of suppression, the myths of secret gardens, hidden cities, and veiled realms multiplied. The Greeks told of Hypereia where the sun never set. The Persians dreamed of Ayur and Envidia, the first land created by Ahura Mazda, now frozen beyond reach. In Jewish mysticism, Eden was reimagined as 4 concentric worlds: physical, emotional, intellectual, and divine, accessible through meditation. The pattern is unmistakable. When paradise could no longer be reached in geography, humanity relocated it into cosmology. Even the earliest maps reflect this longing. Medieval cartographers placed Eden at the edge of the known world, encircled by walls of fire or mountains of crystal. To sail eastward, they said, was to approach the light of the first dawn. And still the stories warned, the way is guarded. The guardians were no longer cherubim with swords, but storms, dragons, endless seas. The imagination became the last frontier of exile. It was perhaps inevitable that the age of exploration revived the search. When European sailors crossed unknown oceans, they were not merely seeking gold or glory. They were chasing a rumor older than civilization itself. The legends of the earthly paradise guided them. Islands of perpetual spring, lands where rivers healed the sick and trees bore immortal fruit. Columbus himself wrote in his journal that he believed the Orinoco River flowed from the Garden of Eden. The myth persisted even as its meaning shifted from spiritual to territorial, from inward to outward. Humanity no longer sought remembrance, but possession. And so the pattern repeated. The sacred was measured, mapped, and mined. Nature became a resource, not a revelation. The serpent's promise, "You shall be as gods," was fulfilled, not in wisdom, but in domination. Science, born from curiosity, became conquest. Yet beneath its equations, the same questions remain. Where did we come from? What was lost? Why does the heart still ache for something it cannot know? Me? In recent centuries, as the last untouched forest fell and the stars themselves became data, some began to sense the irony. The further humanity advanced, the deeper the emptiness grew. The myth of progress could not silence the whisper of origin. Poets like William Blake heard it in visions of the green and pleasant land. Philosophers like Jung called it the archetype of the self, the eternal image of wholeness. Even scientists began to suspect that consciousness itself carried ancestral memory encoded not in mind, but in the fabric of existence. If that is true, then the search for Eden has never ceased. It has only changed form. Every telescope scanning the heavens, every expedition into ruins, every dream of utopia is a variation of the same impulse to find again the lost harmony. But perhaps the map points inward, not outward. The 4 rivers of Genesis, the Pishon, Gihon, Tigris, and Euphrates, may represent not waterways, but currents of consciousness. Sensation, emotion, thought, and spirit flowing from the same source. When these rivers converge, paradise awakens. Ancient mystics knew this well. In the Zohar, it is said that the soul, upon awakening, waters the garden from within. Sufi spoke of the hidden rose blooming in the heart of the seeker. In the Upanishads, the body is described as a tree whose roots reach into heaven. These are not metaphors of escape, but of return. They suggest that the true Eden was never lost. It retreated into the dimension of awareness, waiting for humanity to turn inward again. And yet the world outside mirrors this inner exile. Our cities with their towers and lights echo Babel more than Eden. We have replaced the garden's rivers with circuits of electricity, its trees with glass and steel. We have recreated paradise in image, but not in essence. The hum of machines now drowns the hum of the earth. And still, in quiet moments, beneath the noise between thoughts, something ancient stirs. A feeling that the wind once spoke a language we could understand, that the stars once sang to us. Maybe that is the secret the ancients tried to preserve, that the gate to Eden opens not through discovery, but through stillness. When the mind quiets, the rivers begin to flow again. When the heart listens, the serpent rises not as tempter, but as guide. When the soul remembers, the flaming sword becomes light. The story of Eden after the fall, then, is not merely history, it is prophecy. A map written in myth, pointing not to a past perfection, but to a future restoration. The garden sleeps within the human spirit, dreaming of reunion. And perhaps when enough of us awaken to that memory, paradise will no longer be something we seek, but something that seeks us. There is a quiet irony to humanity's progress. The further we advance, the more ancient our longings become. We dig deeper into the earth, only to uncover symbols that remind us of what we have forgotten. In the ruins beneath the sands of Uruk, the stones still whisper of Eridu, the first city, the city of the gods. Clay tablets call it the dwelling of Enki, lord of the deep waters, guardian of wisdom and creation. But those same texts speak of his departure, of the moment the Abzu, his sacred ocean beneath the world, was sealed. When the waters were closed, they say, the world above began to dry. Perhaps this was the first echo of the fall, not from heaven, but from depth. The loss of inner waters, the silence of what once spoke through the earth itself. To the Sumerians, water was more than substance. It was consciousness, the living memory of creation. They believed that every spring, every river, every droplet carried a reflection of the Abzu, the subterranean sea that connected all life. When humanity still lived in harmony, those waters spoke, guiding kings and farmers alike through dreams and signs. But after the separation, the waters withdrew and men could no longer hear. It is strange that in nearly every myth, the same image recurs: a fountain sealed, a well guarded, a river forgotten. Could it be that the fall into mortality was also the loss of our conversation with nature, a severing of the living dialogue between mind and matter? Modernity calls it progress. Yet the ancients might have called it exile from the voice of the world. When archaeologists unearthed the temple of Eridu, they found its earliest layers surrounded by channels of water, an artificial recreation of the primordial sea. Later civilizations copied this pattern. The pools of Solomon's temple, the sacred lakes of Karnak, the mows of Ankh, always water surrounding stone, always the reflection of heaven shimmering on its surface. Was this architectural memory an unconscious attempt to rebuild what was lost? The Garden of Eden is described as being watered by 4 rivers flowing from one source. That image appears again and again in temple blueprints, as though every holy site was designed to echo paradise's hydraulics. In time, however, even the symbolism of water was corrupted. The flood, once a sign of renewal, became punishment. The sea, once the womb of gods, became the realm of chaos. Humanity had learned to fear what it could no longer understand. The same pattern unfolds in every domain. What was once sacred becomes profane. What was once knowledge becomes superstition. Eden fades not because it was destroyed, but because its language was inverted. There's a haunting verse in the book of Job. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Some scholars read this as poetry. Others wonder if it preserves an ancient memory of sound and structure, an echo of the time when creation vibrated audibly. In that verse, paradise is not a garden of fruit, but a harmony of frequencies, a world in tune with itself. Perhaps the fall was the dissonance that followed, the breaking of the cosmic chord. Throughout later ages, mystics tried to restore this harmony through ritual sound. In India, the sacred syllable was said to contain the vibration of creation. In Egypt, the hieroglyph for to speak was also the symbol for to make real. In Hebrew tradition, the divine name spoken correctly was said to realign the universe. Words once created worlds. To seek Eden, one must pass through that depth. In every myth of descent, Inanna into the underworld, Orpheus into Hades, Jesus into the tomb, the hero must confront the dark reflection of paradise. Perhaps the entrance to Eden and the gate to the underworld are one and the same, and seen from opposite sides of consciousness. To rise, one must first descend. That descent is happening again collectively as the world faces ecological collapse, social fragmentation, and spiritual disconnection. Humanity finds itself staring once more into the abyss, but maybe this too is part of the cycle. The waters that destroy also renew. The flood erases, but it also cleanses. The ancients may have understood this better than we do, that every fall is also a preparation for remembrance. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the hero seeks the plant of immortality hidden beneath the sea. He finds it but loses it again to a serpent who steals it and sheds its skin in rebirth. The serpent survives. The hero forgets. It is a parable of human fate. The eternal renews itself endlessly while the conscious mind loses its grasp. Yet the cycle continues because somewhere deep in the waters, the seed of Eden persists. Perhaps the truest path back to the garden is not through discovery but surrender. The waters cannot be forced open. They respond only to resonance. When the heart softens, when silence deepens, the sealed Apsu stirs again. The memory of paradise is like an underground spring. It cannot die, only wait. And maybe one day, when the noise of history grows too loud, it will rise once more through the cracks, flooding the world with the forgotten sound of creation. Until then, the rivers run unseen. The song of the earth hums beneath our cities, and the garden sleeps beneath our feet. Not gone, only waiting for the moment humanity remembers that the gates of paradise were never in the sky, nor in time, but in the depth of the living world itself. For centuries, seekers have stared at the stars, believing the answer to Eden's disappearance might lie above rather than below. Yet the more we gaze into the heavens, the more we realize that the stars seem to remember something we have forgotten. Ancient astronomer priests once said that the sky was not a map of destiny, but of memory, the record of what was lost. In the old texts, paradise was often described not as a garden on earth, but as a place where heaven and earth were one. To look upward was to look backward toward the time before separation. Perhaps the heavens were humanity's first mirror, reflecting the lost geometry of Eden. Every civilization built its sacred centers according to the stars. The ziggurats of Mesopotamia aligned with Orion and Sirius. The pyramids of Egypt mirrored the belt of Orion. The temples of Teotihuacan formed the same stellar triad. Across continents and millennia, humanity repeated the same celestial architecture, as if trying to reconstruct something seen long ago. It is as though the night sky carried the blueprint of the garden's design, and every temple was an attempt to call it back into being on Earth. Modern archaeology calls this astrology, the worship of cosmic order through terrestrial architecture. But to the ancients, it was remembrance. The stars were not gods, but the scars of creation, each one a luminous echo of a time when the divine and the human were indistinguishable. The ancients did not look at the stars to predict the future. They looked to remember who they were. There is one constellation that appears again and again in these myths: Orion. To the Egyptians, he was Osiris, the resurrected king who ruled the afterlife and promised the rebirth of the soul. To the Sumerians, he was Ninu, the faithful messenger of the gods. To the Greeks, the hunter who fell yet rose among the stars. And in many indigenous cosmologies, Orion's belt marked the gate between worlds, the threshold of ascent and descent. Could it be that Orion, shining in perfect symmetry across the equatorial sky, was the cosmic memory of Eden's gate, the doorway between the divine and the mortal? The evidence deepens when we consider the world's oldest myths of the Watchers being said to descend from the heavens to teach humanity the lost arts of civilization. In the book of Enoch, they are called the Irin, the Shining Ones, who walked among men and taught the names of the stars. In Sumerian tablets, they appear as the Abkaralu, the 7 sages from the Apsu. In Mesoamerica, they are the feathered serpents, bearers of light. And in nearly every case, their knowledge leads to both enlightenment and downfall. Humanity receives the gift of a wisdom, but also the burden of separation. The pattern is unmistakable. Paradise, knowledge, fall, remembrance. If Eden's fall was a cosmic event, a shift in consciousness mirrored in the heavens, then perhaps these watchers were not intruders, but witnesses, custodians of the old resonance, watching over the new fragmented world. The sky, then, is not distant. It is the record of that transition written in light. Astronomers today know that the heavens do, in fact, move. The slow precession of the equinoxes, Earth's 26,000-year wobble, causes the constellations to drift across the sky, changing the celestial backdrop of each age. To the ancients, this movement was the breathing of the world's soul. Every 2,000 years, the sun rises in a new sign, marking a new spiritual era. Could the fall of Eden have coincided with one of these great shifts, a cosmic reset that altered not only climates and seas, but the very frequency of consciousness? Ancient calendars seem to hint at such cycles. The Mayans measured time in vast epochs called Bactans, each ending in flood or renewal. The Egyptians divided their history into ages of gods, demigods, and men. The Persians spoke of 4 world ages governed by different elements: gold, silver, bronze, and iron. And in the Indian Puranas, these became the yugas, each one darker and more fragmented than the last. In every version, the story begins in paradise and descends toward forgetfulness only to rise again. The fall then is not an event. It is a rhythm, a breathing of light and shadow across cosmic time. Perhaps what we call history is merely one inhale of that great breath, one oscillation in an infinite cycle. If so, then Eden has not vanished. It is the other half of the cycle waiting to return when the pendulum swings back toward unity. The ancients called this Zep the first time when the gods walked the earth. They also spoke of its return spy the next time when heaven and earth will again be one. In that sense, paradise is less a memory than a destiny. The seed planted at the beginning continues to grow through the ages, even beneath the weight of ruin, and the stars, constant yet shifting, remind us that every fall contains the pattern of return. But what happens when humanity begins to tamper with the heavens themselves? In recent years, we have filled the night sky with satellites, drowning ancient constellations in artificial light. The very map that guided civilizations for millennia is disappearing. It is as if we are erasing the memory of the sky, the last living tablet of creation. What will happen when the stars can no longer be seen? Will the pattern of Eden vanish completely, or will it retreat even deeper, waiting within the human spirit to be remembered anew? Perhaps the next restoration of paradise will not come through stone or science, but through the reawakening of our cosmic sense, the ability to feel that the universe is alive and that our existence participates in its unfolding. The ancients knew this instinctively. They built their temples not merely to observe the stars, but to converse with them. The shafts of the Great Pyramid align with Orion's belt, not for decoration, but for dialogue, a bridge between earth and the heavens. When one stands in such a place beneath the open night sky, a strange awareness, rises that the same light shining from those stars also burns within us. The atoms of our bodies were forged in their cores. The stars are not distant. They are our ancestors. And if Eden was ever real, then perhaps it was never on Earth at all, but in the space between heaven and matter, where light first became life. In that realization lies the oldest truth of all. We did not fall from Eden. We fell through it, through its light, through its memory, into the slow dream of time. And the garden did not die. It became the cosmos. Every sunrise, every orbit, every heartbeat is part of its living architecture. To remember Eden, then, is to remember that the story of creation never ended. It is still happening, written in galaxies, whispered in atoms, reflected in the eyes of all who wonder. The question is not whether we will find paradise again, but whether we will recognize that we have never truly left. If the stars hold the memory of Eden, then perhaps the earth holds its bones. The deeper we dig, the more we uncover traces of worlds that do not fit into history's timeline. Ruins older than civilization, artifacts that should not exist, maps that chart continents now buried under ice. They are the fossils of a forgotten story, the remnants of a world that may have once been the garden itself, or at least a reflection of it. For if paradise was the union of heaven and earth, then its remains would not lie in heaven's light, but in the earth's deep silence. In 1968, divers off the coast of India discovered submerged ruins in the Gulf of Cat. City walls, roads, and structures carbon dated to nearly 9,000 years ago, centuries before Mesopotamia's rise. Similar discoveries in the Mediterranean, Japan, and the Caribbean hint at civilizations erased by sudden floods. Their temples align with solstices and constellations as if built by a people who still remembered the geometry of paradise. Could these have been fragments of a pre-Diluvian world? The last echoes of the age before the fall reached its full descent. Geologists speak of the end of the last ice age, when sea levels rose more than 100 m, swallowing coastlines where early humans once lived. But myth remembers it differently, as divine punishment, as cleansing as a veil drawn across memory. The flood of Noah, the deluge of Utnapishtim, the sinking of Atlantis all tell the same story from different tongues. A golden age of harmony collapses under the weight of its own knowledge. The waters rise, the survivors forget, and a new humanity begins. Poorer in wisdom, but richer in fear. Perhaps the true cataclysm was not the flood itself, but the forgetting that followed, the erasure of the language that once bound spirit and matter. Ancient carvings that survived hint at an advanced symbolic order, spirals, intersecting circles, geometric mandalas that seem to depict patterns found in nature and physics alike. They are not random decorations, but visual equations, a language of form that transcends speech. What if this was the Edenic tongue? The universal grammar of creation lost when humanity turned from harmony to hierarchy. In the ruins of Gobek, the oldest known temple on Earth, carved animals stand frozen in relief across massive T-shaped pillars. Archaeologists call it the dawn of civilization. But the site was deliberately buried around 8000 BCE, sealed by those who built it. Why bury something sacred? Some say it was to protect it from invaders. Others believe it was to preserve it for a future age. But perhaps it was a ritual act, a symbolic reburial of paradise itself, a recognition that the world had fallen too far to bear the full memory of its origin. To preserve it, they hid it beneath the soil as the soul hides its light beneath the body. And so what we call prehistory might not be ignorance, but mercy, a sacred amnesia. The Guardians of Eden did not only wield swords, they wielded silence. They allowed the memory to fade, lest humanity destroy itself with knowledge it was not ready to bear. Yet they left clues scattered like seeds, myths, megaliths, constellations, songs, pieces of the pattern waiting to be remembered. In the centuries that followed, this hidden knowledge surfaced through whispers. The myths of Thoth, Hermes, Trismegistus, and Enoch. All three were said to have walked with God, to have been shown the workings of creation. In their writings, the world is described as a living being, a harmonic body whose parts mirror the whole. As above, so below, the Hermetic texts say, an echo of Eden's symmetry, the reflection of heaven within the material. But these teachings were condemned as heresy, buried beneath creeds that feared their power. The priests who once guarded Eden's gates now guarded its memory. Still, the pattern persisted in art and architecture. The cathedrals of medieval Europe, built long after the mysteries were silenced, carrying coded geometries. The golden ratio, the flower of life, the sacred spiral. When light passes through their stained glass, it forms mandalas on stone floors, turning sunlight into sacred geometry. Even unknowing, humanity continued to build in Eden's image. The impulse could not be erased. It lived in the human hand itself. But if the ruins of paradise lie beneath us, the shadow of its loss stretches before us. In our age, the forgotten wisdom of the earth has turned into crisis. We have learned to bend matter, but not to honor it. To manipulate energy, but not to harmonize with it. The same fire that once burned as divine revelation now burns in engines and bombs. The Serpent's knowledge, once the bridge between worlds, has become consumption. Perhaps this is the final echo of the fall, the inversion of Eden's harmony into technological dominion. And yet, even within that inversion, something glows. The very sciences that disenchanted the world now begin to rediscover its unity. Quantum physics speaks of entanglement, that every particle is connected beyond time and distance. Ecology reveals that forests communicate through networks of roots and fungi, sharing nutrients, warning of danger, sustaining the whole. Astronomers discover that galaxies align along invisible filaments, echoing the web of life on Earth. It is as if the universe is whispering again, softly, reminding us that separation was always an illusion. What if these discoveries are not new knowledge at all, but old remembrance returning in a new tongue? The Edenic song translated into equations, the cosmic language re-emerging through microscopes and telescopes alike. Science, once the child of exile, may be finding its way home. Still, the process of remembering is never without resistance. Just as the ancients buried their temples to protect them, modern culture buries its mysteries beneath noise. Information without meaning, knowledge without wisdom. We build towers of data that reach the clouds, yet we have never felt further from the ground. In this digital babel, humanity risks repeating the same pattern, climbing toward heaven through technology, while forgetting the living garden beneath our feet. Perhaps the next revelation will not come from discovery, but from humility, to kneel once more to the earth, not as conquerors, but as kin. To listen to the rivers as our ancestors did, to the winds, to the quiet language of trees. The forgotten knowledge of paradise may not be found in machines or temples, but in the spaces where silence still breathes. For the earth itself is a memory, a body carrying the resonance of creation. Every stone, every leaf, every breath of air holds the echo of the time when everything was whole. When we stand upon ancient soil, we are standing on the bones of the garden. And when we listen deeply enough, perhaps we can still hear its pulse, faint but steady beneath the noise of history. Eden was not destroyed, it was buried in the earth, in our language, in ourselves. The question is not whether we can find it, but whether we are ready to unearth it. For the gate that once closed may not open through force, but through remembrance. And the act of remembering, like the garden itself, begins in silence. If silence is the gate to remembrance, then perhaps the fall began with noise, the noise of thought, of desire, of the human mind awakening to its own reflection. Before that awakening, there may have been no separation between word and world, between the name of a thing and the thing itself. But once language divided meaning from being, paradise began to dissolve. The moment we said this and that, you and I, a border appeared. It was subtle at first, a shimmer across the surface of perception, but it widened until heaven and earth stood apart. And from that gap, history was born. The ancients sensed this. They told stories of words that once shaped reality and of names too sacred to be spoken. The Hebrew Shem Hamphors, the ineffable name of God, was said to hold the creative power of the universe. To utter it unprepared could shatter the soul. The Egyptians believed that knowing the true name of a god granted mastery over it. The Sumerians spoke of the Emi, divine decrees that maintained cosmic order. Each one a vibrational key sustaining creation. Words were not abstractions. They were frequencies that held the world together. To misuse them was to fracture the harmony. If Eden was the realm where language and reality were one, then the fall was the birth of metaphor. The moment we began speaking about the world instead of with it, we started describing creation rather than conversing with it. From that moment, meaning became distance. Humanity learned to label, to define, to analyze. Knowledge multiplied, but understanding thinned. This loss of living language is reflected even in our myths of Babel. When the tower rose to the heavens, humanity's speech was confused and the people scattered. Yet perhaps the confusion was not merely linguistic, it was ontological. Words lost their resonance with truth. The divine tongue, which once united all hearts and elements, fractured into dialects of separation. The story of Babel, then, is not a tale of arrogance alone. It is the mythic memory of the final collapse of Edenic communication. And yet, throughout the ages, fragments of that original speech survived. The mantras of India, the chants of the Desert Fathers, the throat songs of Superior all echo a common impulse to reconnect sound with being. In the stillness of chant, breath becomes prayer, vibration becomes bridge. When the word, once again, is what it names, the veil thins. In that instant, paradise flickers through the cracks. There are stories, half history, half legend, of those who remembered this power. In the remote mountains of Tibet, monks are said to have moved stones by sound alone, arranging them into vast temples without tools. In Egypt, the walls of Dendaria depict priests channeling energy through rods and tones. The Bible itself speaks of Jericho's walls falling to the sound of trumpets. Myth exaggerates, but always around a core of truth. Sound, vibration has the power to shape matter. Modern science agrees. Resonance can move, lift, destroy. If such knowledge once harmonized with wisdom, perhaps it was the Song of Eden itself, the vibration that made the garden bloom. But after the fall, that resonance was lost, or rather misused. When sound divorced from intention, it became noise. When knowledge divorced from reverence, it became power. The ancient dream of mastery over creation replaced the older harmony with it. The same frequencies that once healed could now be used to fracture. From sacred word to weaponized noise, the arc of the fall was complete. Even our modern world hums with this legacy. The planet vibrates with invisible frequencies, radio waves, microwaves, digital signals. We live in a sea of artificial resonance, but most of it is dissonant. The Earth's natural frequency, the Schumann resonance, pulses gently around 7.83 hertz, the rhythm of lightning, the heartbeat of the planet. Yet our technologies saturate the atmosphere with conflicting vibrations. If paradise was once a field of coherence, then the modern age is the Tower of Babel rebuilt in electromagnetic form. Still, the possibility of restoration remains. Some scientists and mystics alike suggest that the body remembers what the mind forgets. That deep within ourselves, the ancient resonance still hums. The heart, they say, emits an electromagnetic field thousands of times stronger than the brain's. When synchronized through compassion, gratitude, or meditation, It entrains other systems like a tuning fork restoring harmony. Perhaps the gate to Eden does not lie in rediscovering lost temples, but in reattuning the heart to the song of the earth. This idea that the human body is a microcosm of paradise appears in every wisdom tradition. The chakras of the East, the Sephira of Kabbalah, the alchemical anatomy of the West, all describe the same ladder of light connecting heaven and earth through the human form. The spine is the tree of life, the breath its river, the heart its garden. When aligned, the human being becomes the bridge that was once broken. We do not return to Eden, we become it. The serpent returns here too, but not as tempter. In yogic symbolism, the coiled serpent energy, Kundalini, ascends through the body's inner tree, awakening divine awareness. Its ascent restores the link between earth and heaven, matter and spirit. The serpent of wisdom rises again, redeeming what was once misunderstood. In this sense, the story of the fall hides its own antidote. What led us out of the garden also shows the way back. Yet this awakening is not without danger. Just as the ancient guardian stood at the gate, the human psyche guards its own threshold. To awaken prematurely, to see too much without balance, is to risk madness, pride, or despair. Every mystic warns the same. Knowledge must be wed to love or it destroys itself. The heart, not the mind, is the true key. It is said that when Moses encountered the burning bush, he heard his name called twice. Between those two words, silence. In that silence, the divine spoke. Perhaps the same is true for us. Between the noise of civilization and the quiet of being lies a space where paradise still breathes. What then is the task of our time? Not to reconstruct Eden through technology or conquest, but to listen, to restore the forgotten art of hearing the world as alive, the hum of bees, the rhythm of waves, the pulse beneath our own skin, all are syllables of the same ancient language. When we hear them not as background, but as voice, the separation begins to dissolve. For Eden was never lost, it was silenced, and silence, unlike destruction, can be broken. All it takes is a return to listening, to reverence, to the quiet recognition that every word, every breath, every heartbeat is part of a single unending conversation between creation and itself. Perhaps paradise waits not beyond death or time, but just beyond noise at the edge of a whisper. If the fall was a fracture in consciousness, then history itself may be the long process of healing that fracture. Each age, each civilization has been a different attempt to remember wholeness, to rebuild what was once effortless. The myth of Eden is not a single story, but a mirror that reappears in new forms. Atlantis, Shambhala, El Dorado, the New Jerusalem, every generation dreams of returning to the garden, but each time we confuse memory with possession. We try to rebuild paradise in stone and empire, forgetting that it was never made of matter. And so every golden age turns to rust, every utopia to tyranny. The garden withers when we mistake its image for its essence. Consider the great civilizations that followed the first flood. Egypt, Sumer, the Indus Valley, the Andes all began as spiritual experiments. Their architecture was a reflection of the heavens, their rituals an attempt to sustain cosmic balance.